Hello. Uh, Sorry, it's been a while. Well, it's only been a couple of weeks, but yeah, for one reason or another, I didn't keep to my weekly schedule. Um, Last weekend, I was supposed to do a recap of the tournament I played previous weekend, which was the Bradford 4NCL Congress, um, which I did pretty well in. So I got 3.5 out of 5, and um, I only lost one game, and I took a half point buy in round three because out of pure loyalty to my club, Harrogate, I decided to go and play a Yorkshire League game, which couldn't be rescheduled. Um, so yeah, it was, you know, uh, I'd say a success. The reason I've called this video "Stuck in the Middle" with you is that I still feel I'm at this kind of point where I can kind of see the next level, but I'm not really yet able to beat the players that I meet who are sort of, you know, 2250 plus, let's say, 2300 plus. I still feel like there's, like rating wise, English rating wise anyway, let's forget about a FIDE rating for the moment, but English rating wise, I'm sort of edging up to the point where um, there's not as much distance between me and, say, FMs, some IMs who've come down a bit. But results wise, I'm yet to really be able to score against higher rated players. I still feel like there's a gap. There's like one of the games we're going to go over is my game against. I got to play Peter Wells again, which is kind of funny because I only just did a video about the game we played the previous year. Um, but yeah, I can feel the difference in ability. I'll talk about it when I'm reviewing the game. So yeah, let's just dive in. There was some cool games. There's some things I was very happy with about my play. Um, so let's dive in. So round one um, against Lewis Turner, who's a 2000 plus player. I think he's been up around 2100 previously and has come down a bit. Didn't know anything about him prior to the game. Uh, so let's go. So I was white, and I'm currently trying to learn the Open Sicilian, but I'm not there yet in terms of being able to actually play it over the board. So I'm still on my previous anti Sicilian repertoire. And yeah, this move is interesting. I play this move a lot myself. Um, I guess the most normal move in this position is knight c6. Um, some people play e6. There's, quite a lot of things are playable here. A6 is pretty good. D6 obviously is also playable. So people who don't want to get move ordered out of their favorite open Sicilian, like let's say that you have a Najdorf player, they will often play D6 in this position just in case white decides to trick them and go knight f3, d4 in the next two moves. Uh, but anyway, so g6. And here there's like a lot of options. I used to play Grand Prix attack. Uh, you can go into any kind of open Sicilian. You can try and get into a dragon variation from here, which I think my opponent plays the dragon. Um, so what I opted for was immediate d4. So basically, the idea of this is that with bishop e3, we go into a kind of a dragon after knight c6, queen d2. Now, it looks like black can exploit the fact that white hasn't played f3 here by playing knight g4, but it's actually not that great. The reason that trick is effective in the mainline dragon is because usually there's a white knight on d4, so the bishop doesn't have the option to move away. But here, if black plays knight g4, we can just go bishop f4 and it's totally fine. And in fact, he's then going to lose some time after f3. I mean, it's possible to play that way, but it's nothing special. So after a few moves, we get into this interesting situation. So this is a bit like a Yugoslav, but instead of being on d4, white's knight is on g1 because he's lost a couple of moves with his queen here. So on the surface, it looks like this should be favorable to black. But it's not so simple. Weirdly enough, it's actually not so bad for white that his knight is back on g1. And in the mainline dragon, that knight on d4 is, I wouldn't say a problem, but it's something that black can use to gain time. So there's a lot of lines in the mainline dragon where, in order to get himself free, black will trade on d4. Trade on d4 and then play kind of b5 sort of ideas, like the Topalov variation. Also, in some of the lines where white long castles, or in the classical, often white will end up retreating this knight to b3 just to prevent the d5 pawn break. And in addition to this, there's another route that this knight can take. Since it's not on d4 and it's back on g1, it's got some other options. So we're going to see one of those options in this game. So just as an example, if white at some point plays h4 and black replies with h5, this knight h3 to g5 route is now open for the knight, which can be very good sometimes. And there's also another route, is knight e2 to f4, and this is what happens in the game. And although it looks like this shouldn't be any good for attacking because it blocks the queen and bishop battery, actually it's really handy. So basically there's some interesting nuances in this position compared to a normal dragon, and I've had quite good results with it online. I'll try not to digress too much for the rest of this video because I really don't want it to be another 3-hour epic. So I'll try and keep it short, but sometimes I can't help talking about interesting things. So yeah, h4, totally standard idea. The engine suggests it might be just a touch better to put the king on b1 right away, but h4 is fine. And h5, again, totally standard. The engine would rather black just develop the bishop immediately and or bring the queen out right away, but h5 can't be too bad. King b1. So these are all sort of just we're getting our guys in the game, basically. Now, yeah, rook b8 is something of an inaccuracy here, and black is trying to get b5, b4 in, obviously. The more effective ideas in the position tend to be queen a5, rook c8. So rook b8 might be just a little slow here. So yeah, knight f4. And basically the idea of this is that we want to play g4, and after black responds with h takes g4, we want to push h5 right away. And this becomes very powerful because it's supported by the knight on f4 and because extra pressure is created on the g6 square. And the other reason why it's good is because we've now got two knights hitting the d5 square, which is one of the key squares for white in the position. So b5, g4, b4, which is consistent. If he takes this here, then h5 is very strong. So, for example, he can do this to defend the g6 pawn. And now the engine says we can actually just push this on here. When if he retreats the bishop like that, he's in an awful lot of trouble. Basically, he's going to get mated. We're going to get h7 check. He can't take because queen h2, and it's going to be catastrophe on the h file. So he's got to play king g7, and then here, and basically mate is happening in a few moves. So he's already got to be quite careful here. The engine says take here, queen g2, here, and now the engine says we can take because it's got both of these h-file squares covered. But this is still about plus 1.5. So I haven't gone much further into the line, but white has a huge attack here. So black plays b4 instead. And we go into d5 and e6. And this was first big think of the game. You know, all of the moves up to here have been pretty natural. And now I've got a big decision to make. And in the game, I didn't like the look of taking on f6, queen takes, queen c1. You know, I play the dragon myself, and generally I would have the feeling in a position like this that when black has created this battery, that bad things are going to happen for white on the queen side here. So I didn't evaluate this position very well, basically because the engine says white is doing great here. But I didn't like the look of it. Now, the crazy thing here is that the engine says black's best move in this position is e5, which is absolutely like, I mean, I suppose the idea here is that if we go knight d5, he's just going to take here. So apparently g5, queen d8, knight d5, and this is the best black can do, which is hard to understand. So let's see what else can happen here if black just plays some sort of natural attacking move. I guess we're just taking the d pawn. And if he protects the d pawn with there, then I guess we're just breaking through on the king side. So actually, you know, probably this position deserved me to spend a bit more time evaluating. I was a bit superficial here. I looked at this position from a long way out, well, from a few moves out, and I dismissed it. And then I started looking at the sacrifice line. But I probably should have looked a bit closer at this. This looks like a less risky way to have an advantage. Anyway, that's not what happened. So we go back here. He played e6, and I did not take the knight. I had a nice big think, and I sacrificed a piece here. So g takes h5, which, by the way, is perfectly sound. The engine says this is actually almost as good as taking on f6. So he has to take, otherwise he's busted. We go pawn takes, and here he makes a mistake. So here he should disrupt my attacking setup with d4. When if I played bishop takes, I'm losing probably my most important attacking piece. So it would go something like this. What can he do now? Gosh, there's some crazy stuff here as well. Look, engine gives this. Queen takes, queen f6, equal. So better for white is retreat the bishop. And now he's got a slightly better version of what happens in the game. So he didn't do that. He played pawn takes g6, which is very natural. And now after that, so we get to this position which, you know, we both had to evaluate. I was trying to evaluate this when I was thinking about sacrificing the piece. And I just thought, I have 2 pawns for the piece, and black's king is completely exposed. And this has to be good for me. You know, it just has to be. Like, I couldn't see any concrete winning plans here because there's so many possibilities for both sides, but it just didn't really have any doubt that this was more than sufficient compensation for a piece. Also, it's very hard for him to defend. You can see because he, you know, the amount of moves that are marked as inaccuracies here, it's so hard to find the right move. So the right move here is rook f7, which makes sense. You know, the rook defends along the second rank. So he plays this. Rook g1, again, that's a slight inaccuracy. The engine would rather I play h5 right away, but this is fine. King f7, again, slightly inaccurate. Top move here, knight g4. Just straight up giving the piece back to try and block up some lines to the king. Not a move that humans would consider, I don't think. So king f7, bishop h6, again, inaccuracy. It just wants me to play h5 all the time here. Rook g8. Again, it wants me to play h5, but I thought I'm getting a third pawn, and I'm gaining time on his knight. So this seemed a really obvious move to me, and the only reason why it's not the best is because of a move that, again, neither of us considered. So there's a great move here, which is knight d4. So the most obvious point is that if we take here, then our bishop on h6 hangs, and this takes a lot of the sting out of the attack. But also, if we do something like this, so obviously we have an incredibly dangerous attacking position here, but we are a whole rook down now. So the engine has this as about plus 1.2, which means that we have more than a rook's worth of compensation here. We're doing absolutely great. But, you know, it's difficult. This is more difficult than the game. So neither of us saw this knight d4 idea. So yeah, he chooses one of the worst squares for the knight. I mean, I guess it would be worse to go to a5, marginally worse. Best move, if you don't see knight d4, best move is knight e5. And then what I was planning on doing was takes, 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 queen g5 check, and then, you know, here, let's say there. So I now have 3 pawns for the piece. I've got a passed h pawn. I've still got a very strong attack, and I wasn't sure if this was, you know, I knew this would be good for me, but I didn't know how good. So it's a little surprising to see that it's more than +3. So this is completely winning. You know, I suppose we're probably also going to pick up this e pawn, and our king is very safe. But yeah, during the game, it's hard to be sure in positions like this. You know, how would I know if it's like +1, +2, +3? But all I could see is that it's very good for me. So that didn't happen. So he played knight e7. bishop d3, which is actually the only winning move in this position, weirdly enough. Everything else is fine for black. Knight takes d5, and now we have a long forcing sequence, which I saw most of it from this point. So take on g7, queen g5, and he played rook g8, which is what I thought he would play. Now the engine throws up some really bizarre moves for black to try and stay in the game here. Like the top engine move is bishop a4, which is less about threatening anything with the bishop, and it's actually more about opening an escape path for the king to avoid checkmate. But it doesn't really make any difference. This is +5 for white. So yeah, rook g8, and now we have a nice forcing sequence. So knight h8 check, king e7, rook e1 check. Apparently this is a slight mistake, so this would allow him to chuck a piece and run away, basically. In this position, I should give check with the other rook. But it's all winning. So rook e6, and here we go. Now this is where he does have a chance to run away, so he can run away to d7 here. Which he doesn't do in the game, but d7, and then I should play rook takes d6, king takes, knight f7 check, and basically once the dust settles in this position, we end up in this ending. So although I'm only 2 pawns up, it's much worse than it looks. This is nearly +5. This is very easily winning for white. My king is completely safe. I can easily give myself an escape square to avoid any back rank tricks. The bishop is anchored on d3. My rook's active. These pawns are weak, so this is terrible. But it does allow the game to continue. In the actual game, he captures the rook, and now we have a nice... Well, now it's an amazing sequence. He can run to e5. If he goes to e5, then we're hunting the king like this. And basically, wherever he goes, there's no escape. c6, get to something like this. We don't really need to analyze this. It's totally winning. But again, this would have been survival. But now he's getting mated. So rook e1 check, king f8, queen h6 check, rook g7, knight g6 check, and he shortens his agony. He can avoid mate for another couple of moves by playing king f7 here. But bishop e6 check, and mate. So that was quite nice for round one. This was one of the games that made me think I really ought to start learning the Open Sicilian, because I do think the positions suit me and they're fun to play. Obviously, it's fun to get checkmated. It's not as much fun to be checkmated. So, maybe I'll change my mind about the Open Sicilian when I get absolutely crushed on the wrong side of a dragon. Right. So round two. So this was a player who had no rating and no games online, which always makes me feel a little nervous when you get a player like this entering an open tournament. They had a bye in round one, which is why they were on 1 point. So like it could be literally anything. This could be a total beginner who is just entering an open tournament for the fun of it, or it could be some sort of online whiz who um, is a very dangerous player. So you kind of can't really gauge someone's strength until you've had about probably half a game against them. Uh, so I took the game very seriously, even though there's a good chance that my opponent was a lot weaker than me. So I thought, am I going to actually get an open Sicilian? No, it's another Alpen. I don't know how many Alpens I've had. I don't know what happened, whether Carlson played a few Alpens and delayed Alpens recently, but I get so many. This is like the main line of the Sicilian now for me, as far as I'm concerned. Like in at club level, I'm sure I must have had over the last couple of years since I started playing chess again. I'm sure I must have had like 10 Alpens of various different kinds, compared to maybe 4 proper mainline open Sicilians. So, but at least I've had to learn what to do against the Alpen. Um, so this delayed one basically is all about whether white can get d4 in. That's the whole thing. Um, so that's what these next moves are going to be about. There's a few different systems here. So, um, like in the game, you can go for this bishop d3 to c2 system to support e4 and then prepare d4. You can play bishop e2, which takes advantage of this little tactic because it looks like the pawn on e4 is hanging, but in fact, if you take it, then nasty surprise. The knight is lost. So that's another way you can play it. In this position, you can also go h3, which takes advantage of the same tactic. So, you often see these moves in combination. So often you'll see bishop d3, c2, and then h3. The idea of h3 is just to stop bishop g4, which is one of black's ideas to fight for the d4 square. Anyway, so my opponent goes for this system. So already after about 5 moves, I've answered the question. I've kind of narrowed my opponent's rating range to probably, they're not a beginner anyway, right? This is an opening that is fairly strategic. This person has learned the basic ideas of it, so they're not a beginner. Now, it is possible here to play either h3 or to just play d4 straight away. So if you were going to play d4 in this system, this is probably the time to do it. And then we're going to do something like this. I'm going to play bishop g4. And then various different things can happen here. We go bishop g7. You've got to be a bit careful as white here. So if you castle here, then things get a little bit awkward after an immediate knight d7. So there's now uncomfortable pressure on the d4 pawn. So you got to go here first. So basically, there's lots of nuances around the fight for d4. One of the ideas for black here then is to play e5. So this is a different type of game, but basically, in this bishop d3 c2 line, now would be the time to play d4, which probably means that I've been micro inaccurate by playing g6 here. So if you look at what the engine is saying about this central battle, apparently I shouldn't lose any time and I should just stick the bishop on g4 right away. Because basically one of black's primary ideas is this trade. So there's no reason to delay it. We know we want to do this because we know that white's only plan is the d4 pawn push. So why give them an opportunity? Should save g6 for later. So, this is all interesting because I'm now getting so many of these, like I said, that the exact move order nuances are quite important. I know I'm wandering into long digression territory, but when I was playing a blitz tournament at the British Championships, I played Jude Shearsby twice, and in one of the games where he was white, he played this delayed Alpin system, and he played bishop d3, c2, and he played it very accurately, and he managed to get d4 in and keep his central pawn duo, and he was better. So that's what made me start learning some of this stuff. Right, digression over. Now I play bishop g4, and now my opponent is not in time to get d4 in, so now pretty much we can prevent it. Yeah, h3. There's not much you can do here to force d4, because if you delay it, so let's say you play d3, bishop e3, I've got time to go bishop g7, knight d7. And the whole idea is if you play it right away, then we can go takes, and we now have a couple of options. We can go for this plan here, which makes life awkward, or we can just chop this right away when white is forced to play g takes f3. Now, the engine actually doesn't mind this. The engine likes the extra support in the center. It says white has 2 bishops and white is doing fine. But, as humans, if, allowing the pawn structure around your king to be broken up like this doesn't look very good. You can see quite easy attacking plans for black. But anyway, it is actually possible to play like that. So my opponent gives up on getting d4 in, which is probably a good idea. So like I said, this is now too slow. You don't have time to force d4 in because I'm just going to play knight d7. And I've got more firepower on the d4 square than white does. If necessary, I can even bring the queen in. So that's not happening. So he's got to find another plan. And another decent plan in these types of positions is, a4, knight d2, c4. The only thing is, now that d4 is not coming, the bishop on c2 is a bit silly. Oops. Sorry. Yeah, knight d2, b5. So, this is standard idea, right? We want to play on to b4. Also, it prevents knight c4 just for the moment. There's no reason here to waste a move playing rook b8 or a6. We can just get b5 in one move. Generally, in those types of Sicilian positions, if you can get b5 in one move, then just do it. And straight on to b4. And knight c4 is actually a mistake here. So the engine says knight f3. And then, although it's giving 0.0, I feel like black has a practical advantage here. Black has very typical Sicilian queenside counterplay, and it's not really clear what white wants to do. Obviously, white can't be worse here. He's not really done anything wrong, but I would always rather play black in this position because my plan is just so clear and obvious. I'm going to just shove this pawn down. I'm going to open lines on the queen side. I'm going to bring this rook over here. Everything is, I don't really have to think very much for the next 10 moves or so. But anyway, knight c4 is played, and the problem is I now have this. And if this is taken, then white has a horrible position now. So I'm either going to win a pawn here, or this is taken, then I just have a crushing position now. This is just, everything's gone wrong for white here. So the fact that this d pawn should not be taken means that knight c4 was a pretty big mistake, because now white has to lose another tempo with the knight. So it goes back to d2. And I actually lose most of my advantage with this move. So apparently what I should be doing here is increasing the pressure with knight h5, which looks like a very strong plan. So f4 square looks quite nice. We're opening the long diagonal. It's not very easy for white to protect this pawn, because bishop b2 is going to be met by rook b8 kind of ideas. So yeah, knight h5 looks very strong here. Another plan the engine points out is to take the pawn in the center and play like this. So the problem with what I did, I guess, is it just doesn't apply enough pressure. So e6 is kind of a little bit of a nothing move here. I can't actually even remember what I was thinking when I played it, because the d pawn doesn't need any support. Not sure what this move is about. So knight b3, knight d7, bishop d2. All the next moves are pretty sensible on both sides. So my opponent is now, realized that they're worse, and they're defending the position fairly well. This was inaccurate, because now the queen can be chased around. So I think my opponent missed this. Here, just rook b1. I mean, basically white is on the defensive here. Black has the initiative, but nothing terrible is happening. It's still sort of within the bounds of equality. The weaknesses are defended. I can't yet bring a lot of pressure to bear on any of these weak pawns. So if white continues to develop sensibly, they should be okay here. Problem with queen f3 is that knight. Now I'm activating my pieces with tempo, and now I'm going to have big threats. So now c4 and d4 are real threats. So c4, and yeah, white's best here is knight c5, which is a little difficult to see, because it doesn't look so great to put the knight just hanging out there. Rook b2 looks very strong. d4 looks very strong. My opponent played a much more natural move, knight d4. And the problem with this move really is just that it loses material. So this pawn now can't be defended, and white is collapsing in the center. So they're losing a pawn, but in addition to that, my pieces are going to be much more powerful. So pawn takes, knight takes, and now basically I'm winning the exchange. In fact, at first, when I was looking at this position from a few moves back, I thought I was winning a whole rook. But white does have this move, queen a3, so he only drops the exchange. So I do have to be a little careful here. This bishop is unopposed, and I've got dark square weaknesses around my king. So I just have to be careful not to space out and fall into some kind of mating attack here. I mean, at the moment there's nothing, because this knight on f5 defends the g7 square. But I just have to be a little careful. So threatening rook b1. So got to play bishop f3. Again, gaining time on the bishop. Now they grab the a pawn, which, I was a little more concerned about the bishop trying to stay on this diagonal. And then maybe in future try to chase this knight away, and then maybe, you know, this kind of thing. I mean, I'm going to have ways to prevent it, but I thought this was the only practical chance for white to try to do something. I didn't see the point of grabbing the a pawn because, you know, way before this pawn can promote, um, I'm going to be breaking through. The you know, white just doesn't have any time to waste here. Anyway, bishop takes, b8, queen f6. I guess the other idea here was to sort of try and rearrange and create this queen and bishop battery, but it's going to be very hard to do. I've got this square under control, so the bishop will have to try to come here, and it's going to be impossible to do that. So knight d4. So again, if he tries to do this, I've got this lined up, which just wins that rook, because if king takes, then this is mating. So basically the king's going to come to h2, going to take here. Everything's falling apart now. So bishop g4, h5, and now white falls into it. There's not really anything much to be done here. The engine wants to just give up the piece, and says this position is about -5, which, you know, I'm a whole rook up now, so that makes sense. They play bishop c7, and I get my queen sack tactic. So again, if that's captured, then we got mate. So king comes to h2, take the bishop, and now there's no time to do bishop e5, because I'm going to have the same mating idea as I do in the game. So rook takes check, queen takes check, mate. So that was round 2. So not a terrible game. You know, I think judging from results my opponent has had since then, they're probably about 1700, 1800 in strength. Yeah, impossible to know ahead of time. So yeah, round 3 I took a half-point bye, and yeah, drove to Leeds. Played Yorkshire League game where I lost to Tim Wall. And then in round 4, so first round on Sunday morning, I had black against Peter Wells again, which felt slightly unfair. I would have rather had white, and I had black in my last game, but this is how the colors worked out. So I did quite a bit of preparation for this game, absolutely none of which was any use, which is a little bit demoralizing, to be honest. So if you've seen my previous video on the King's Indian, where I reviewed my last game against Peter Wells, it was in, I'll just briefly go through it. So it was in this knight d7 line of the King's Indian. So this line here, and the game had gone, I think, like this. C2, C6, rook D1, and here I played rook E8, which is a little inaccurate. I think Gawain Jones recommends H6. So I was, because this is super main line, I was expecting that my opponent would repeat this because there's no reason not to. It's mainline theory. I had been inaccurate in our previous game, which he had won in a very nice way. So I thought he had no reason to avoid the main line, but his spider senses must have been tingling. He didn't want to repeat it. I did have something prepared, which I'm not going to go into in this video, just in case. So we get the first few moves are the same, and then he plays bishop e2 right away, which I kind of have to castle here and not do anything different because white always has the option of transposing back into the main classical King's Indian variation with knight f3 on the next move if he chooses. But he plays the Averbach variation, about which I know exactly nothing. I did know that in this that in general, when white puts the bishop on g5, either in this kind of a line or in the same-ish variation, black is supposed to play c5, you know, either immediately or in a move or two. So I kind of knew that c5 was probably the right move. I also knew that h6 can't be bad. But I know nothing about these lines. I know absolutely no theory at all. And so I played a move which made some sense to me. You know, the knight can't be bad there, and I'm keeping my options open in terms of, am I going to play e5? Am I going to play c5? But the problem with this is white's next move. So white now prevents me from kicking the bishop with h6, and also has more options about how to deal with c5. So knight d7 is a little bit inaccurate. I think the main line, c5, and now you see white doesn't have the option of just playing queen d2 because now we'll take there right away. So if he doesn't want to play d5, and d5 is the best move here, but if he doesn't want to play d5, he'd have to play knight f3, and then we can go takes, takes, and queen a5 apparently. Queen d2. This looks quite similar to what... right. So the difference between this and what we got in the game is my knight is going to come immediately to c6. And we now have a slightly better version of a Maroczy bind. So in a normal Maroczy, I think this bishop would usually be on e3, and when black captures on d4, white will recapture with the bishop. And the fact that the bishop is on g5 now makes this so much of a problem that the engine would actually like white to capture on c6 immediately, which, just looking at this visually, it just cannot be bad for black. This d5 square is usually the main problem in these positions. Now it's not a problem, so this has got to be equal. And for that reason, white really has to play d5 as a response to the immediate c5. And I guess after this we're into some normal Averbach theory, so I'm not sure what the right move is here. I can give a couple of engine moves, so apparently we can sort of make it a bit of a Benoni. This is probably fine, and I probably just need to learn it. So hopefully we can now see why knight d7 is a little bit inaccurate, because we're going to get some of these lines where the knight is just a bit misplaced on d7. And Peter now thought for 20 minutes. which was quite surprising. But I suppose he was trying to work out the most accurate way of punishing my move and landed on it, which, the most accurate thing for him to do here is what happens in the game, which is to go into a Maroxy where this knight is misplaced. Queen d2, c5. Now d5 is good here, and he said he was thinking about it, and my intention was to go into a sort of a benko. So we would go here, and now, plenty of moves that white can play here. If he does this, it's, it's a benko, right? I would be reasonably happy playing this because I used to play the benko. But objectively speaking, it's better for white. So white has his standard plan here of playing a4 and putting his knight on b5. And because he's not committed this knight yet, this knight can now take this optimal route. So this is probably a decent version of a benko for white. But he didn't want to give me this opportunity. Maybe he thought that that type of position might suit me a little better. So he played knight f3. And now we get the Maroxy that I was talking about. And the problem that I have, like I said, is this knight really should be on c6. So in order to give this knight some useful work to do, I now have to lose a couple of tempi. So knight to c5, f3, knight to e6. And now he could take here. There's nothing wrong with playing knight takes e6, bishop takes e6. He goes back to e3, which is just as good. And essentially, if I capture on d4 now, which would be the normal thing to do, I'm a tempo down in a Maroxy bind. However, that is still the best move. And what happened to me here was, I think I just not quite overestimated my position, but maybe you could call it slight misevaluation. So I was looking at some tempting active possibilities here, and I thought that my pieces could get quite active. And the problem is there just isn't really anything. White is in control here. So really what I needed to do was to realize objectively that white is in control here. I'm now worse. And basically have to find a way to try and stabilize the position and defend from a worse position. So, objectively speaking, I should chop on d4 and play bishop e6. So some, takes, bishop e6, and just play this position. So we'll do normal kind of Maroxy bind type moves. We might play a6 or a5. This knight will try and come into c5. We're going to be worse, and I'm most likely going to lose it because I don't like Maroxy positions and I try to avoid them. But objectively speaking, this was the best option. But basically what's happened here is I've been tricked into a position I don't like, very skillfully. After the game, I kind of just admired the experience, I guess. What do you call it? Experience or deviousness or psychology. I appreciate the ability to maneuver the opponent into a position that most likely they are not going to like. It's possible that Peter has identified me as quite a active player that likes tactics and complications, and that I would possibly suffer most in positions like this, which that would be also my assessment. So yeah, so I went knight h5. knight c2, which I guess is not strictly necessary. So basically my idea here is if he castles, then I've got some options of trying to use this square. I can also just try and trade twice on the d4 square. So the top engine line here is this, and then knight f4. Now, white is still doing fine here, like, plus 0.8. But I've freed my position up a little, and I have a little bit of play on these dark squares. So that was the idea. So knight c2, very sensible. Keep more pieces on the board and stop me from exploiting the dark squares. And I had a couple of different plans here. So I thought for quite a long time here. And I went for quite a committal line, which was based on kind of a misevaluation of the position a few moves later. So here I went bishop e5. One of the moves I've been thinking about was f5, which is actually the top engine line here as well. And you get this kind of position. And the reason I thought this might be a good idea, I was aware that this was probably objectively not great, but the position has now become sharper. It's no longer a nice, tidy, sedate Maroczy bind. We now have, threats and tactics, and objectively speaking, white is doing great here. It's more than +1. But yeah, possibly I should have done this. I played bishop e5, g3, so now f4 is a big threat. Queen a5. So the idea of this is that if f4, then I take on c3. And I'm doing fine. But I have to have a plan of what to do in case of b4, which is what we played in the game. And my plan was to go into this ending. And, I misevaluated it. Part of what makes this game interesting is that misevaluation. So I said to Peter after the game, I thought I was doing all right there for a while. And he goes, I'm not sure. I think it was always quite nice for me, or words to that effect. And of course, he was completely correct. Now, the reason I thought I was doing okay here, so basically what I played is bishop takes, queen takes, queen e5, takes. And I thought that this position was all right for me. I thought I had, this I thought was a square that I could work on, that I might be able to bring rooks to the d file and plant a knight in here. I thought I have got options of playing f5. I can always support this pawn with pawn to f6. I could see that the queenside pawn majority is going to roll. But yeah, I thought it was possible to fight in this position. I wasn't, I don't know exactly how I would have evaluated it. Maybe I would have thought white has a slight advantage here. In fact, white has a clear advantage, plus 1.5. Yeah. What Peter said about it was basically without the dark squared bishop on the board, black has to be doing badly here. But yeah, that makes sense. Maybe it's really obvious that once I've given up that dark squared bishop, I can't be doing great. I guess this is just a position that I didn't fully understand. All right. Anyway, so he castles queenside, which really surprised me. Um, I was very much expecting something like, say, King F2 and bring these rooks over and, try and play on the queen side here. Castling queenside was so surprising because I thought lines were going to open on the queen side. Um, but it is in fact the top engine move. This is the best move in the position, objectively speaking. So quite instructive, really. White has no problems with his king here. Black has no attack. Basically, without the g7 bishop, there's no possibility of creating mating threats against the white king on the queen side, and it feels more comfortable over there, and it can even be useful. So, yeah, bishop d7, b5, excellent move. Quite obvious in hindsight, but basically, this opens up the route for the knight to come into the d5 square. Knight b4, b8, knight d5, takes. Slightly more accurate here, apparently, is to take with the c pawn, because the engine, I guess, values the space advantage and the cramping more than it values the queenside pawn majority. So basically it says something like this is +2. I suppose black has no defense against the pressure on the c-file. Peter took with the rook. f6. a4. Yeah, the engine suggests playing a6 here instead to get a pair of pawns off the board, which makes sense. I was trying to erect some kind of blockade, but there's no blockade possible here. I can't prevent white eventually pushing this pawn. So that's the sadness in this position. Again, kind of inaccurate. a5 right away is apparently more forceful here. I guess the point of a5 is that you're threatening to simply win a pawn, and if I capture this, then now the a7 pawn is going to be a catastrophic weakness. So that was quicker. Knight c7. After the game, Peter asked me why I didn't just go back to e6 here and try to repeat the position. Which I suppose I should have. Again, this a5 idea is very, very strong. Or I suppose white can shift his rooks over to the c-file. Truth is, it just didn't occur to me to repeat. So I was still trying to reorganize my pieces a little and create some pressure against that c-pawn, but it never works. So basically, white is now easily winning. Temporarily kicking the rook out. Yeah, I've no defense here. And now it's all over. I resigned here. So again, really nice game from Peter. I felt like I never got into this one. I guess that's, that's all you can say about this game. I never got into it. You know, from the opening onwards, I was worse, and that's it. So after this game, I was on 2.5 out of 4, and my final round game was against Cian Ward, who is a talented young junior of about 2150 strength. I didn't really know anything about him. The only thing I did know was I know that he plays the French, and had some funny conversations with some other players before the game, because I had no good line against the French. So I've always played the advanced variation, and I've been trying to make some of these new gambit lines work. So I'll just very briefly show uh, what I used to play. So this Queen B6 move is what previously was considered the main line in the advanced variation, and I was experimenting with these systems. So playing bishop d7 here straight away is a very well-known, very old inaccuracy where white can take, and in this position he's somewhat better. So for that reason, black captures on d4 straight away, and there's some interesting new gambit lines now, where white just castles, and you just let this pawn go, and eventually black will capture the c pawn. Usually black will wait for white to move this knight to d2, and then we'll then capture the c pawn, and you get a position where generally white has enough play for the pawn, and it's quite interesting. But the problem is that I'd say the majority of people nowadays are not playing queen b6. They're playing this bishop d7 move, after which these gambit ideas are significantly less good, because one of the reasons that it's acceptable for white to just give the pawn up is that in future the queen on b6 becomes a target. So you can have a rook come and gain time on it, or the bishop coming to e3 can gain time on the queen. So this is a better version for black. And I've lost a couple of games. So I lost a game against Paul Townsend in this line where he played bishop d7, and I think I took quite early on c5. And I'd also had another couple of games where, you know, I tried to give this pawn up and didn't get enough compensation for it, and ended up throwing more material on the fire. And yeah, so I had three games in a row where I'd lost in the advanced variation, and I'd lost all faith in it. And the only other thing that I know at the moment is I know something about the exchange variation. But I didn't really know if I wanted to play it, because I really wanted to win this game. And, you know, the exchange variation has the reputation of being very drawish. So it seemed like a weird choice. But you got to play, you know, what else was I going to do? I can't play a main line, knight c3 French or Tarrasch. So exchange variation it was. And it was funny because when I played this, my opponent kind of not quite gave me a funny look, but basically he instantly recaptured and then got up from the board in a kind of a pointed way, like, oh, for God's sake, you know. Which is interesting, because the thing is, when you look at the engine evaluations in this position, the best move, according to the engine evaluations, is knight c3. Following this, the next best moves are knight d2, which is plus 0.2. And not that we should take these evaluations absolutely seriously, but, you know, they're indicative of something, right? So this and the advanced variation, it considers to be equivalent. And with the same evaluation, the exchange variation. So what this means is that the engine considers that this is just as valid a way for white to play for a small advantage as two of the main systems. So basically it's better than its reputation. Its reputation is it's a dull, drawish line, which may be true, but what you get out of the exchange variation is a symmetrical position with one open file in the center. And if you've looked at a couple of my previous videos, you'll know that I like that kind of position. So I've got this line I play against the Caro-Kann, which ends up in exactly that, but a mirror image, where the open file in the center is the D file. So you can use some of the same methodologies in the exchange variation as a mirror image. So basically it's fine, but yeah, my opponent obviously thought I just wanted a quick draw. So he plays bishop d6, which is, there's a few things that black can play here. So obviously knight f6 is a main line. Knight c6 is possible. Knight c6 is what people play when they want to keep the game a bit more complicated, and then white will typically go bishop b5. But yeah, bishop d6, perfectly good. And then this immediate c4 is really the only try for advantage for white. And there's a very well-known trap here, so often one of the black setups is to play knight e7 followed by bishop f5, but obviously in this position knight e7 immediately loses a piece. Black can also capture, and then we go into this isolated queen pawn position, which I'd be very happy in. I like playing the side with the isolated pawn. And in this version, we haven't had to lose a tempo with the bishop, so this is decent. So he plays knight f6, which is the main line, and it invites us to play c5, which we do. And here I played knight c3. It's very slightly more accurate to put the bishop on d3 right away, but this is fine. And he plays b6. And this bishop e3 move is the whole idea. So the whole idea of putting the pawn on c5 is to play this system where what we're trying to get to, we're trying to get black to take this c pawn. We're going to recapture with the d pawn, and we're going to use this d4 outpost. And if we get everything we want in the future, we're going to push these pawns. So that's the whole idea. And in compensation for this plan, black is going to get a protected passed pawn on d5, which, if he manages to disrupt our plans, then this will win in the endgame. So that's the strategic battle here. So he does capture. Apparently he should not. Apparently he should just castle and wait to see where I'm going to put my light squared bishop. I don't really see the difference because the engine has him capturing on the next move. Castles. b4. So basically, I'm playing b4 right away here because I want to get it in before black gets a5 in. So the question is, could black have played a5 straight away instead of castling? And the answer is yes, he could. And then we get this type of position. And according to the engine, white is slightly better here, about plus 0.5. This square is just incredibly useful. It's a little bit annoying that for the moment black has prevented b4, but we are probably going to be able to organize it in the future. And then we'll have a strong plan of playing b5 to try and undermine the d pawn. We can probably plant the bishop on d4 and the knight on e5. So it's basically, it's slightly more pleasant for white here. So we get to something similar in the game. So he castles, I play b4 straight away. c6, bishop e2. And round about here, he had a giant think. So I think he was starting to realize that there were some strategic difficulties to overcome here. And I think the main thing he was trying to decide is, do I want to open up the queen side and play a5, a takes b4, or do I want to leave well enough alone over here and maybe have another plan, bring the bishop out here, bring the bishop f5. So he was trying to decide what plan to play, and eventually he decided to play a5. So we get this forced sequence. And he plays bishop g4, which is marked as an inaccuracy. Again, it's not totally clear why. The engine top move here is knight g4, bishop d4, bishop f6. So I don't know what's best here. I do have to be a little careful here. So if I castle now, there are some funky lines being thrown up by the engine here. So knight takes h2 is apparently a thing. So the idea is, if bishop takes f6, then knight takes f3 check. If knight takes h2, then bishop takes d4. While if king takes h2, bishop takes, knight takes, queen h4 check, and black has won a pawn. So that would be a nasty surprise. Best line here apparently is take on f6 and castle. So this is black's best. I think white still has slight advantage here. It's just kind of a pleasant position. I mean, I've got this kind of route for the knight going as well. I'll try and get knight into d4. Anyway, he plays bishop g4, castles, knight e4. So this was a mistake. He should probably just develop with rook e8. But I think he was getting the feeling that he was worse, and he wanted to try and complicate matters. So I took, which is not the best. Apparently, it's best for me to play knight d4 here. So I was a little bit concerned about bishop f6 ideas. Anyway, takes, and rook d1. Apparently, he should play this. And this keeps my advantage to a minimum. It's very hard to do. So basically, I feel a little bad. Saying what he should do here because the engine has suggested one move or another. I don't really understand the differences. So, I'm telling you, oh, he should have played bishop f6 here because the engine is recommending it. But, I don't really, I'm not able to explain coherently to you why one of these moves is better than the other. And therefore, I feel like I'm not giving intelligent commentary. Anyway, he plays queen c8, knight d4, bishop f6, queen b1. And basically, he's got big difficulties here. So he's tried to free himself up by playing knight e4, but the e-pawn is now quite a weakness. And this is what decides the game in a few moves. Because, yeah, he's got problems defending the e-pawn. Plays rook d8. Now, actually, this is my biggest inaccuracy of the game. I should take the bishop, and what I was afraid of was takes, kick the queen. Queen comes to h5, and I was just a little bit weirded out by this pin on the knight on d4. I felt like he might be able to use this to unravel his position. In fact, the engine gets to this position and it just says, nope. You just play rook d2, and we easily break the pin with knight b3, and all of black's difficulties remain. Weak e-pawn and a knight that has trouble getting into the game. So that would have been most accurate. I played h3, takes. We're apparently now close to equal again, by the way. Rook takes, queen takes. And now, to stay within equality, black has to try and trade the queens. So this is a must. And if I trade the queens, then this is a dead draw. My bishop is now not much good, being on the same color complex as these pawns. And it's going to be almost impossible for me to force through b5, which is my only pawn break. I'm just not going to be in time because black is going to have this maneuver. I also can't really attack and win this pawn because f5 is now perfectly safe for black to play. So I have to keep the queens on. But wherever I go, so let's say I go to b1 again, black has this kind of idea. So this was how to keep equality. And having missed that, black is now worse again. Because I've got this move. So basically this square is really fantastic for the queen because it puts pressure on the e-pawn. It guards the back rank. It protects the b-pawn, and it also potentially supports the b5 pawn push in future. So the queen is optimally placed on b1. g3. So I'm going to win this pawn. And black can't prevent it because of some tricks in the position. So he tries to keep the pawn by playing queen b8. So this was obviously his plan. He can try and keep a little bit of play here. He can just give me the pawn, play bishop e5 there, and now at least his knight is getting into the game. So he locks into these squares, and we're still going to have a fight to try and convert an extra pawn advantage here. But he tries to keep the pawn, and the problem is just this tactic. So I play queen takes, and whatever he does here, he's in trouble. So he can't take with the queen because of our mate threat here. So he takes with the knight, and now we just have a little bit of geometry. Bishop f4, and the queen is overloaded. So the queen cannot guard these two threats simultaneously. Just a very nice kind of square. So our queen is touching these 2 points. The queens are in a face-off, and the bishop on f4 forces the black queen to abandon the only square where it defends everything. Very simple, but very easy to miss. So he resigned here. So that's it. That's 3.5 out of 5. Pretty decent games. I'm quite happy with how I played. It's a little bit demoralizing to lose without putting up a fight, but on the other hand, Peter is a grandmaster. That's what's supposed to happen, and I'm supposed to learn from the experience. So that's what I'll be trying to do. In the other games, I felt like I played well and didn't miss too much. And most importantly, I gained about 15 FIDE rating points. So I don't get a lot of FIDE rated games, and I need to get my FIDE rating up. It's very low at the moment. So yeah, pretty successful. Not much else to say about it. Next video, I'm not sure what it will be on. I feel like I'd like to do one on an opening variation, but we'll see. Next tournament is going to be the Harrogate Congress, which is the weekend, the 28th of February and 1st of March. That's one of the White Rose Circuit tournaments. So yeah, probably get in at least one video between now and then we'll have probably another tournament recap. So thank you very much. Thank you for your attention, and see you next time.